Hello and welcome to another episode of the Acadia Talk Show series. I'm Frank O'Collins, speaking to you today on Tuesday the 19th of February 2013. Thanks for listening. The topic of this audio is standing with honour, why the elite cannot risk people to become morally responsible. Let me repeat the theme. Standing with honour, why the elite cannot risk people to become morally responsible. If you've been reading the blogs and if you've been listening to the recordings in the last few weeks, you would have picked up the increasing emphasis that is being placed on personal responsibility versus collective conformity. And indeed why we are at a watershed moment in seeing potentially a change from the age of collective conformity under the false guise of conservatism. Of course, this is the model that has allowed the ruling elite to hide behind the common good, the argument for the common good, and then themselves not to believe one shred of what they say. This is the model and the philosophy where we are all servants to the body politic. We are all citizens. We all have a duty that they've used against us in then showing absolutely no moral fibre whatsoever themselves in the excesses of payment, in consumption, in having absolutely, as we said, no moral fibre whatsoever. In contrast, when we've spoken about personal responsibility, we refer back to those most basic, most simple lessons that we can find in history from the most famous of teachers, whether we come from an Islamic faith in the teachings of Mohammed, whether we come from a Buddhist faith in the teachings of Buddha, whether we come from a Christian faith in the teachings of Jesus Christ, or even if we come from an indigenous faith, a traditional faith, in the history and the stories of heroes of value. No matter what culture we come from, it doesn't take long to dig and find that the principles of personal responsibility are almost identical. No one is above the law, all are equal before the law. To do to one another as you would expect to be done to yourself. To demonstrate self-restraint, to honour and respect others. These are not complex concepts. But for whatever reasons, and we'll talk a bit about that tonight on this audio, the world finds itself incapable, for some reason, of demonstrating even the most basic common decency and respect to one another. In fact, it's reached a point, if one argues in anyone that is trying to make a living in business, it's reached a point that even the most basic elements of commerce are breaking down. They're not breaking down because computer systems are not working. They're not breaking down because people don't know what to do. They're breaking down because when you come to an agreement and you agree that you will supply something, some service, some good for a fair price, and you deliver that service and then you are not paid an agreement, or you order a service in good faith and that service is not delivered, when people you're dealing with break their own word, trust is sacrificed. And when there is no longer any trust, there can be no effective trade. And so trade in the world is blocking up, becoming constipated because of this problem of a lack of personal responsibility, of a seeming absence of moral responsibility. Now, the other thing we'll talk about in the audio tonight is some of the many arguments that people come up with whenever this is raised. In fact, any discussion, I'd say, regarding the question of virtue, of morality, is often a bit like your parents coming up and saying to you, we're off to the dentist. It's a collective sigh of, oh, here we go. You know, we're going to be beaten around the head of, you know, we're all evil or we're all wrong or we're all sin. That's not right. That's not what I'm saying. So I ask you to think of one thing, or try and consider one thing in this audio tonight. I want you to, if you can, observe your own reactions as we go through. Look at the almost knee-jerk reaction to some of these thoughts as we go through, and try and discern what voice that is that seems to poo-poo these things or find reasons and excuses not to address it. Have a look at that, because that might help each of you to maybe understand better why it is that these things cause the reaction when we raise them in you, or why you find it so difficult for others to address it, why this is the hard questions that people seem to continually avoid in want and desire for some easy solution. And finally tonight, before we get into the meat of it, the topic is not why you need to become morally responsible. This is not a bashing as to why you need to consider your own situation and really what is the key to happiness. The topic tonight is actually why the elite cannot risk, why the elite system has spent so much time, spend so much effort desperately trying to keep you unbalanced and for you to absolutely avoid any form of moral responsibility. Tonight is about the argument that if you can stand with honour and virtue, why this is an perfect position, why this is the only and ultimate remedy that exists in law, why this is the answer, why this is what will provide the catalyst for change, and no other false claim, false promise. This is the only catalyst for change, and why the system is desperate to hope that there will be few who demonstrate the ability to stand with honour and virtue. And we're going to talk about why that is the kryptonite to the system. Well, there is no doubt today that whenever someone comes and makes some extraordinary claim that all the corporations have been foreclosed, or all the banks have been foreclosed, or that we all have an abundance of money there just to claim, no matter what claim is made, it is abundantly clear by the activity that we see through the networks and the blogs that this is the most appealing message, and the message that seems to get the most interest and activity from people. And there is no question when we look at our culture today in Western countries that we have unlimited access now to porn, hardcore porn, and pornographic violence. There's no question that society is totally and utterly geared in a commercial sense now to the easy provision to us of processed foods, of synthetic painkillers, of beer and other forms of legalised drugs. And even when we do have some capital, why we should impulsively purchase some other equipment or some useless toy to waste our savings. This is not just reflected in our entertainment, whether it be television, whether it be the ads on anything now that we deal with on the internet, but it's also reflected in schools, it's reflected in our universities, it's reflected all around us. We are bombarded 24/7 by the existing system. That such lack of self-control, such avoidance of difficulty is not simply to be cherished as a right, but to be worshipped, to be celebrated. And you see another deeply concerning trait amongst all of us in a certain way. This sense that society owes us, a sense that our entitlements have been taken from us and that we are owed something by this sometimes as yet unnamed group, that we have been wronged by society. And so society owes us and needs to pay up. With all of this, we really can summarise the society that bankers and lawyers and those that claim to be the custodians have made for us now, the consumer capital society, as one where we seek to avoid at all costs pain, form of suffering, difficulty. That the easier and the more superficial things are, the more celebrated they have become. Now I know when you make such sweeping generalisations like that, I know that there can be many examples to counterpoint. And in fact, if you're listening to this audio, if you've come to read Eucadia, if you've even considered some of the various grand claims that are out there, the chances are the reason you've even started to look is that you have very personal, very real, very deep examples in your own life of suffering. It might be because you have had your home taken from you. It might be because you have had disputes with the tax office, as many have, and have found that far from just simply having the money that they claim owed, that such penalties and punitive and torturing has destroyed your life. It might even be that you've dealt with a family court where people have been denied access to their children or where their children have been taken from them. It may be that others have injured you and the courts have done nothing, seemingly protecting those that are the criminals, and the victims are left to rot. So in distinction from this facade of an easy life, welfare, avoidance of difficulty, avoidance of having any kind of choice and consistency, the reality is that those of you that are on the call and those that are searching for an answer really have experienced very real suffering. And if there is a distinction in such places as the United States and Europe over the last few years, it is the truth that a great many people have experienced deep personal suffering in the last few years, greater than anything they had previously experienced. So what is it when we talk about honour and virtue? What do we mean by this before we talk about why it's so important and why it is kryptonite to the ruling elite? Well, even though I've spoken about it before, let's just do a quick recap on what we mean by this so we have it clear. And then let's talk about some practical examples of exactly what we mean. I'm referring to the website globe-union.org, globe-union.org, or you could go to the website Americas-union.org. euro-union.org as another one, or the website euro-union.org as another example. If you go to any of those websites and you go and click on the largest graphic, which should be on the left-hand side of the web page, you'll see a charter, and if you open up the index of that charter and go to Article 9, you'll see a reference to what's called the living virtues. I'm going to read what it says because it is on all these charters and it really is directly relevant to what we're saying exactly. So bear with me while I just read what you can see on globe-union.org. The present charter, and this is referring to any of these charters, the present charter recognises an immutable fact of all harmonious and just civilizations being the sufficient presence of moral excellence in the lives and actions of sufficient members to enable society to function. So let me stop there and just explain what that is about. If you have been brought up a Christian, indeed if you even claim to be a Christian, then by definition that means that you believe the words, the teachings of Jesus Christ to be above all other teachings, including the Old Testament. That's literally what a Christian means. By the way, you might have heard me say this before, if you can't get that in the right perspective, if you think someone else's teachings are more important than the teachings of Jesus, then logically, sensibly, rationally, you can't be a Christian. But if you believe the words and teachings of Jesus Christ, then obviously that is the most accurate and simplest definition of what is a Christian. But it doesn't mean that we need to have thousands and thousands and thousands of people that literally live the life and suffer literally in the manner of what we believe to be the life of Jesus Christ. We don't call on that. We only need a handful of people. A handful of people that in each generation we can look to, we can trust implicitly. We can trust literally our lives and not have that trust ripped from us. Not have our faith destroyed through deception. We only need a handful. I might say we only need one that we can trust implicitly in our life. For that often to be enough to give sense and purpose to the world. So we can live in a world where there are 99% of the world where we all suffer some flaw, as I do. We all make mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes. That's part of life. But that there is at least someone in our life that we can look up to as an example of moral excellence. If you think about it, that really is the central problem of our society. It's not simply the immorality of the financial system. It's not the immorality of bankers and the fact that they've destroyed more value than they've ever created. It's not that the church has lost its way or turned a blind eye to institutionalized child molestation and abuse. It's that through these institutions we struggle to find a politician, a banker, a business leader, a religious leader that we can look up to and say, you are the personification of moral excellence. You are the example that I can call in my lifetime that resonates with the story of Jesus Christ or Mohammed or Buddha or Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or any of these great figures of history, regardless of our faith, or Confucius or any of the others. Let's continue. So as you said, the present charter recognises immutable fact that all harmonious and just civilizations, being the sufficient presence of moral excellence, that when the balance of moral character and those with questionable character reaches a maximum negative tipping point, the end of a particular civilization is inevitable, regardless of the continued evidence of the rule of law. Now, you've probably heard this. This was the second sentence in this opening paragraph we speak of in Article 9. And you've probably heard from a number of commentators that speak of the end of Pax Americana or the end of Western civilization. And then you've heard the counter-arguments that it's not really an end. Here, we look at, if you like, the canary in the coal mine, a sign where something has reached a terminal point, where there must be, by definition, a change. And here, we find the absence of living examples of moral excellence, the absence of people that we can look and say stand with honour and virtue, as really the tipping point to us that inevitable change is coming. Inevitable change, regardless of whether the system still clings to and claims to be a rule of law. Now, in a roundabout way, this should really give hope to all of us as we continue to talk about what do we actually mean by virtue. And I just make the point now, for those of you that have encountered such arrogant ignorance in the face of magistrates' courts and county courts and district courts and supreme courts, those that have witnessed firsthand the absolute corruption and stupidity and lack of logic and lack of reason in the present private courts and the members of the present private bar guilds, or those that see complete corruption in the political classes and complete incompetence, total incompetence in the banking class and the religious class, that you are in fact witnessing the tipping point. And don't fear, because this is the proof that the system is up for a change. And who is the change? We are the change. And we'll come to that again later in the call before we wrap up, what I mean by that. So let's continue, and we say in the second paragraph, the keys of moral excellence are defined as the living virtues, being 7 characteristics essential to the character of all officers and leaders of society, being respect, honesty, commitment, enthusiasm, compassion, cheerfulness, and wisdom. I'll just repeat those: respect, honesty, commitment, enthusiasm, compassion, cheerfulness, and wisdom. Let's go through and see what we mean exactly by these 7 living virtues, which is really what we're speaking of when we speak of standing with honour and virtue. So point 9.2 in any of the charters, like the globe-union.org charter or the Americas-union.org charter, defines the living virtues as the following. The affirmations of the 7 virtues are 7 phrases representing an affirmation of the key quality represented by each of the 7 living virtues. The first being respect. So what do we mean by respect? Respect is, quote, I am aware of being in the moment and discern what I see. That's the first virtue. Think about that. Respect. What is respect? Respect comes from respectare. Spectare in Latin is see. That's where you get the word spectacles from. Spectare. Respectare is I see the things around me. That's all that the word literally means in its construction. I'm aware of being in the moment and discern what I see. Being in the moment is the first virtue. Being here. Not being off your face, not being drunk, not being high on some sugar rush, not being distracted by your PDA, your phone, your email, your work colleagues, your friends. Just being in the moment is the first virtue. Now, is that hard? Does it sound hard? If you're not in the moment, when you drive, there's a risk you'll have an accident. And people are having more and more accidents because they're not in the moment, because they're trying to text, for goodness sake, because they're speaking. They've proven that people who text on the phone or even speak on the phone have the same reflexes as someone who is completely drunk. If you're not in the moment, how can you possibly hear what people say? Think of all the miscommunication that is flooding your life. Think of all the time that you're losing in your life, the complications in your life today, simply because you are not in the moment. Nothing else. Don't worry about the money at the moment. Don't worry about the lack of resources. Just simply that you are not in the moment and you're not discerning what is around you. It's as if you're in a fog. You're in a haze. How many people do you know who are like that? Apart from maybe times that you honestly are in the same situation. I am. I are challenged by that every day. Just because I'm in the moment now doesn't mean that I'm in the moment tomorrow. I can't promise I'm in the moment. That's the point. This is a present moment virtue. It's not the future. I can't bank it for the future. I can't fix the mistakes of the past. Dwelling on the past is not going to fix it. It's all about that I'm here and I'm seeing things for what they are. Nothing more. Now, would it surprise you that that is the central fear of the system by the ruling elite? If you can see things for what they are, then you can see the matrix for what it is. If you can see things for what they are, you can see the matrix for what it is. So does it not surprise you that the first virtue, as simple as it is, I mean, we've said it's so simple. Be in the moment. You don't have to think in the moment. You don't have to act in the moment. Just simply see with your eyes open. That is the first and primary goal of the existing system. Sugar, sugar, salt, salt. Porn, porn. Noise, noise. Music, music. Desire, desire. Not simply for pleasure and avoidance of suffering, but through those pleasures to distract us, to keep us unbalanced, that we cannot see what is in front of our face, to remain in a fog, a permanent fog. That's just the first virtue. It's that simple. And would it not surprise you that that first virtue is connected to the base chakra? It is the base chakra. If you've spent any time with Kabbalah or Kundalini or any of the Eastern mysteries or any self-development, you realize that if you're not aligned, if you're misaligned, how can you possibly find balance in your life? How can you fix your life if you are not balanced? How can you? How can you find happiness and harmony if you yourself are not balanced? The very fact that your ego says to you, moral responsibility, personal responsibility, I've heard this all before, does not prove to you the fact that if those thoughts come in, that there is an issue? Doesn't it prove the fact that so few people come and listen to Yucadia and read Yucadia, yet so many parts of Yucadia are out there and claimed by so many gurus? Is that not evidence that people are being distracted, that they're in a fog? They can't see for what it is? We've got 7 virtues to go through, so I'm going to get to the next one now. So if you're looking at Article 9, you'll see that the second virtue is listed. And the second virtue is honesty. Honesty. Also happens to be the second chakra, your lower intestine. And honesty is simply the following phrase, a phrase that is the bedrock of the rule of law for more than 2,000 years. And the phrase is, my word is my bond. My word is my bond. That is honesty. How often do you lie? White lie, omission, how often do you think? I've read some studies that it is estimated that most people and again, these are huge generalizations, so please forgive me for them, but it is estimated that most people at adult age in Western society tell something like 50 to 60 lies in a day. 50 to 60 lies in a day. Now, most of those are white lies. Yes, I love your cooking, honey. Yes, the check's in the mail. I'll do that now. Yes, I've sent that. Okay, these are white lies. These are lies to pretty much get people out of our face or to avoid an argument, to avoid conflict. These are simple lies that we probably wouldn't even think about have any consequence. But then there's potential for all of us to tell at least 1 to 2 big lies every day, which do have a consequence. And the reason they have a consequence is that these lies often mean that we have to remember the truth and the lie. Unless we are a complete sociopath, someone who believes everything they say to be true and has the ability to completely manipulate reality to be whatever they believe it to be, these are sociopaths. And you find, unfortunately, in this present world, on this concept of collective conformity, that the ruling elite, who want to continue to have their orgies and continue to avoid all moral responsibility, to remain incompetent, they hire sociopaths to be their front people. So we find them now as politicians, complete sociopaths, idiots, morons. I mean, what a brilliant strategy of plausible deniability by having and recruiting and having elected sociopaths as leaders, because they simply are too ignorant and too arrogant to change and honestly believe their lies. They believe them to be true. So they hire them now as policemen. They hire them now as judges. They hire them now as bankers. So the second virtue, my word is my bond. Well, what are the benefits of this virtue? Well, let's talk about some really practical things when we talk about court. I've said this before, but let's come back to some of these examples. If you are prepared to take control with competence over your own affairs in the administration of your estate, a subject matter that we've been speaking about for several years now with Eucadia, then you have a moral and ethical responsibility to that estate. If someone comes to you and says, give me $100,000, you have a moral responsibility to the estate to ensure that the demand is valid. And if it is a valid demand, you have the moral responsibility to pay it, particularly if it is based on some agreement, some honour. That is what my word is my bond means. But if someone comes to you and says, give me $100,000, $90,000 of which is a claimed penalty, $10,000 is a claim ownership of the agreement, and there's no ensuing paperwork, there's no backup to this, then you must demand to see the paperwork. You must. And if they don't pay, you must ensure that it is on the record that they are in dishonour. If they then prosecute the estate based on the refusal to provide the evidence, then they clearly are in a state of unclean hands. What is unclean hands? Unclean hands means that they are proceeding in bad faith, that is, they are using a fraud to proceed because they're not providing the demand. They're refusing to give you the evidence. They're also proceeding with vexation, which is they're using the court case to shake you down, to get the money, ransom, and they're doing it with prejudice. Even the most pseudo laws of case law and commercial law that now dominates the private courts in the world, even these courts, with all their tricks, cannot permit cases to stand where there is clear evidence and challenge based on unclean hands, bad faith, vexatious litigation, and prejudice. And why?